Brought to you by NORDIC podcast.
Honestly, you are so decorated academically that I don't even know how to introduce you. So, how would you see yourself? How help the people out?
Yeah. Do you want me to start academically or?
Because you have a
exactly?
PhD, first of all.
I'm working on a PhD.
You're working
now,
on a PhD, right? And it's mostly focused within research in.
Archaeology, Southern Africa. So I'm an archaeologist by background, trained in my bachelor's in South Africa at the University of the Witwatersrand. So that's where I did my bachelor's. I did my master's there as well. And then I moved to Norway in 2017 to start my PhD, which is focused in the archaeology of Southern Africa. And by Southern Africa, I mean specifically South Africa and Botswana.
So, for people who do not know, what is archaeology? Because they might be picturing Indiana Jones right now.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
That's always the fun thing. Every time I say I'm an archaeologist, people imagine, oh, Indiana Jones, and imagine me like pulling up a whip. But yeah, so the kind of textbook definition of what archaeology is the study of material culture. So we are reconstructing the past through what we find on the ground, for example. So as if you're an archaeologist who does excavations, you dig on the ground and you piece things together to paint a story. So the fun way that I used to think about it as a student is like we're like detectives, if you want to think about it, because we kind of go around the world and collect pieces of evidence, from like paintings, old paintings or stuff that we find on the ground, and we pull it all together to tell stories of how the past was like and how it kind of looked like, which is I think pretty awesome.
I like that definition, like detectives of history.
Right, yeah.
So, what time period in the past? How far back of an archaeologist do you go? Do you guys get a specific time period assigned? How does that work?
Yeah, so archaeology is very, very broad. So, for example, I focus in the last 500 years of history in Southern Africa. So my PhD is looking into a period between the 1700s to the 1800s, so about 1750 AD to 1850, which is, according to us in archaeology, is not a long time ago. But of course, our time span as archaeologists is a little bit weird, because for us, we say, like 500 years is pretty recent. But, to people, it's like, well, that's actually a long time ago, MC. So, yeah.
That's very true. When we put it that way, of course, because you guys are piecing together history.
Right.
500 years does become a lot shorter when you're looking at the whole civilization of man.
Right.
So specifically south of Africa.
Yeah.
So now, in your research here, first of all, what made you go into this research? It's a very specific field.
Yeah. So it's a very interesting story, because when I was about to finish high school in South Africa, I knew that I wanted to study, and I had to go to like university. And my first choice was actually environmental management in geography. But when I went to register, I ended up signing up for archaeology.
Right.
And the reason behind that is because I did not have money to register on time. So I registered late. And when I was at the school signing up for the course, they were like, yeah, we have archaeology. We have geography and archaeology in the department. I was like, just sign me up. I'll figure it out as I go along. And, I didn't even know how to pronounce archaeology. I used to say archaeology. I used to pronounce it like phonetically like that. And that's how I ended up getting into archaeology. But by the end of my first year in undergraduate, I was just like so in love with archaeology, because I saw a world that I kind of could contribute to, and that I could do much more with, actually. Yeah.
So 1700 to 1800, you said?
Yes.
Right. So what in this time period would strike people the most?
So this is a very interesting time in Southern Africa, because this is the time when colonization had just started. So 1652, you have the arrival of colonizers in the Cape Colony. And as they are moving up into the interior of South Africa, things start to unravel. So this is a time that is known, particularly from the 1840s, as the time of the crashing. It's called Umfekane in Guni or Difekane in Sesotho. It's a time of war. It's a time of people moving around and shifting around.
I see.
So there's a lot of things that are interesting that are happening as people are shifting and moving and mixing as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And is this phenomenon within this time period reflected any other place on Earth? Or was this an isolated, because colonialism, as we know, happened everywhere, but what was specific to South Africa during this time period? Or was there anything specific or exclusive to South Africa?
Yeah, I mean, at this time, I think it was interesting because during this time, people were thought to have lived in sort of different tribal groups. So the area that I focus on geographically is the northwestern part of South Africa, where you find predominantly Sotho-speaking people, which is one of the languages. Sotho and Tswana, one of the 11 languages of South Africa. And from the
No, I was going to say Sotho, and the second one was
Setswana.
Are they still ongoing languages
Yeah,
today?
they're still going languages. Yeah,
Okay.
because we have 11 languages. It's
11.
11.
Wow.
11 languages in South Africa. So, and then towards the southeast, you had Nguni people, which were mostly like Zulu people, and a little bit up Ndebele people. So during this time, you have these people, as colonization is happening, you have the migration of these people from the southeast into the northwest of South Africa, and you have that mix of people, which I think is a little bit specific to South Africa, but I think in general, this can be seen in archaeology in different parts of Africa.
Because that really unravels a country in a way.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the echo of that unraveling, we still see the waves up to today.
For sure. Because I mean, if you when you look at South Africa now, it's kind of still battling with what happened during that time. That was the start of a very kind of complex and very difficult time in South Africa, which we're still seeing today. Because after that, it was all about power. It was all about, who was in charge, about the economy, who controls the wealth and power within the southern part of Africa.
And who controlled it for the most part during that period?
At that point in time, with the advent of colonization, a lot of African people who were there were displaced. So they were displaced of their land, and at that point in time, the colonizers were pretty much taking over the land and having predominantly control over the region.
These were, obviously my history is not close to anything like yours, but were these British colonizers at the time, or?
Yeah, so the first ones to arrive in South Africa were the Dutch.
And then the
British came, and
Okay.
then that's how
Okay. It's really interesting because these, I mean, you obviously hear about the apartheid, right?
Right.
But how long after was this? And why did this even happen? What signs could we see? Because we have seen colonization in other countries, but not apartheid like that.
Yeah.
So why was that an quote unquote insulated or isolated incident in South Africa, and we didn't see it, for example, in Cameroon, where you had the French and the German come in, but there was no history of an apartheid country.
Yeah.
So what ignited that? What was the catalyst for that?
I would say that the way that I've always seen it is apartheid. It's actually, side note, it's weird for me to call it apartheid because in South Africa we all say apartheid. That's how we usually call it. But anyway, the way that it happened was apartheid was the extension of colonization, because it was legalized in 1948, for example, but that was put into law, but it was already happening in South Africa in so many, in so many ways with segregation, because the word Apartheid is an Afrikaans word that means apartness or separateness. So that was just an extension and a deeper version of, segregating people so that you get control. So divide and conquer.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. Yeah, that might explain. Again, I don't know if the British were in the country. I'll give for example, Cameroon. So I don't know if the British were in there and if they didn't do that there or not.
Yeah.
Though it obviously makes sense that, the divide and conquer motto of the British was something they practiced. And as you said, it was already happening to just put it into law.
Yeah.
So, like with all these things going on today, as we often discuss, history can repeat itself.
Right.
Do you think that, what are your thoughts because you have seen the past in great detail compared to a lot of other people. Not only that, but you've studied it to a high degree. And with all that is going on in certain countries now,
right,
with the racial inequality, and not only that, but the lack of executive steps towards eradicating this, because it's 2020.
Yeah.
So what does this tell you as a person who has studied the past and seen it kind of create such a result after I don't know how many years, you know?
Yeah, so...
is there a chance that it repeats itself? Is there a chance that are there any signs and symptoms of a possible apartheid happening again, let's say?
Yeah.
How do we get out of this? How do we basically not let this happen again in today's modern world?
Yeah. So this is a very interesting one, what is happening today. So I'm going to take you back a little bit and talk about one of the people that I admired. So Bantu Steve Biko. So Bantu Steve Biko was a young anti-apartheid activist in South Africa. So he was living during the time of apartheid. And he was an activist, was one of the founders of a movement called Black Consciousness and the Black People's Convention. So he was very much speaking out against apartheid. And one of the things that my favorite pieces that he wrote is a piece that he called I Write What I Like. And what he said there was really profound. He said, for us to expect justice is to be naive, because these people have a duty to their electorate to be superior and to enforce and to show at all times that they have the superior hand. So what we're seeing, I think, in today's world is that, is that cycle of we have to stay on top. We have to show that level of dominance. And I think it has repeated itself so much. And it's really sad to watch.
So the fact that this cycle is unbroken, and the fact that, as you're saying, it's repeating itself. How? Because we have seen the ugly side. Obviously, this cycle is already ugly, but we have seen the uglier side of this cycle.
Right.
Not only in Nazi Germany, not only in South Africa, but obviously there is no limit to how far off you can go.
Yeah.
But how do we stop this? Besides education, because education is the key.
Right.
Are there any... Let me put it this way. Maybe it's an easier way to get it. What signals or signs can we see that tell us that, okay, we have gone too far, or have we already crossed those signals and signs?
For sure. What's been happening in the U.S.
Right.
Very recent events. I won't speak about that in great detail because we've all seen the signs. So that is to me, for me, the way I always look about it is it takes me back, because I think that what happened in history is kind of keeping the cycle going. And how we sort of get out of it, for me, is I think we have to educate people better. And what I mean by that is the history that we learn mostly in school is history that was written by the victor for the victor. Right. So we have to go back and educate people differently, and not just talk about educating people differently, but actually go to the curriculum and look at the content that we are teaching. Because I can tell you, I mean, in South Africa, I remember reading to my nieces, for example, and the textbooks that they read in school as kids were kind of from a British perspective, right? And that kind of sets something into the mind of a child already, right?
Exactly.
It does something.
Exactly.
So when we talk about educating, we have to mean it, and we have to check the content, for sure.
No, absolutely. You have a point there, because I actually, when I was like, 16?
Yeah.
I did like high school in Washington State.
Yeah.
And simultaneously, I had a friend who had high school in, I'm trying to remember the state, but it was a southern state.
Yeah.
Now, the funny part is, when we both came to the chapter of the Civil War, what he told me and what I read, completely different. Completely different. This is same time, same period, and literally two completely different textbooks.
Yeah.
Where in at least the one he had, that curriculum at that school in the South, now I'm not going to say all Southern schools, obviously, but from what he had access to, it wasn't a civil war. They didn't even use the word war.
Yeah.
It was, I'm trying to remember the term. It was a conflict.
Oh.
You know, and that's kind of what it was looked upon as.
Yes, yeah.
While obviously in the North, where I was in that particular school, it was obviously the Civil War and the way they described it. So what you say by the, history is written by the victor, obviously is 100% true. No one, we can't dispute that at all. And that makes you really think, okay, so what's going on in the textbooks of kids at that age?
Yeah.
Not only that, but what pictures are we seeing in those textbooks?
Yeah.
What roles and characters are portrayed? How, you know? If the only time you see negative characters that are portrayed in a certain light or in a certain gender or in a certain race.
Exactly. It sets up a particular image that you grew up with. And I mean, I'll tell you something. For example, I started traveling the world in 2015, and my first trip was to the States. And after that, I started traveling a little bit as a researcher, going to conferences. And it was amazing because I would be upset when people ask me things like, oh, so you have like lions in your backyard?
Wow.
Or like, I have a friend from Ghana, do you know him?
Right.
I'm like, seriously? Or like, I have a friend from Uganda, his name is so-and-so, I'm like, that's East Africa, bro. I'm from South Africa. You know how big that is. And I used to be upset, but then I had to take a moment of reflection and think to myself. And what I realized is, sure, some of it is ignorance, but some of it is because the narrative has been written in a different way and not necessarily by Africans.
Right.
So I'll give you an example. In archaeology, we have one of the archaeological sites which are recognized as World Heritage Sites. And for example, Great Zimbabwe. I don't know if you've heard about Great Zimbabwe. So these were late Iron Age sites which were built in the 1300s in southern Africa. And they were thought of as not being built by Africans. So and
how come? Because they were advanced?
Yeah, because they were too complex. And I'm not sucking this up. If you want, I can give you a journal article. So this was in academic journals because people said, well, these are too complex to have been made by Africans. They were made by, some said they were made by the Egyptians. Some said they were Hindu temples. Some said they were even made by aliens, but not Africans. So
wait.
Yeah.
So basically, actually, you have opened the door here because now, in retrospect, that I'm thinking, you have the same narrative with the Aztec civilization, the pyramids, where you see a complex structure so great, must be aliens.
Yeah.
No, what about the indigenous? No. Aliens. So, but I've never thought about it like that until you said it.
Yeah.
So when it gets too complex, but it's never aliens that built, I don't know, Victorian castle.
Yeah.
So why is that?
Yeah. So because you are constructing a certain narrative, right? So and that's how I see complexities of, for example, racial inequality. Because to me, I think they start somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Nothing starts from like out of nowhere. It begins somewhere. And the more I studied a little bit about history, the more I realized that no, this is kind of where all of these things began, and then they kind of unfolded from there. Because what that meant was the idea that, which still persists today, that Africa is a place that needs to be saved, is the place where there was no innovation. It was just like people there, and then people came and made it better. Right, which is the thing that still persists today. Because as, for example, the recent events that were happening in the US, there were people who were like interviewed on the streets who still believe today that, well, black people shouldn't complain because they're treated much better. Their lives were much worse in Africa.
Right.
So I'm like, but there was innovation in Africa. So the point of it is, what I'm trying to make is that Africa was looked at as a place with no innovation, no complexity. It was made better by other people. So Africans were never responsible for anything good. Right. So, and I think from that perspective of privilege and superiority, and then the cycle continues.
What is the strategic advantage of such a narrative? Because obviously there is, but from your point of view, what is the strategic advantage of having that narrative set at that time? Because we know how rich Africa is in resources.
Yeah.
So I would probably say that would be, but is there anything else I'm missing? Like,
It manifests itself in so many different ways. I think economically, politically, socially, in so many ways, and then we grow up with it. I mean, I can tell you for sure, growing up in South Africa, race is a very clear thing. It's a
in what way?
Clear structure. Because, for example, this is probably a bad way to put it, but apartheid was kind of the best form of racism, because you separated people in any shape or form, even geographically. So I, for example, never had friends from other races until I went to university.
Wow.
So I went to a black school, black clinic, black church, black everything, friends. And then it was when I went to university, I was like, sitting in a classroom where there was like Indian people, white people, and all people of different color. It was like, oh, wow, this is a new environment for me. So that...
How old? University, of course.
Yeah. So I was like 17, 18 years old. So that was kind of my first encounter with, people from different races. And that's when I started making friends. So you can tell, so if you grow up in such a world, all of us grow up in these kind of boxes, then of course the hierarchy of power is always clear, because we hang on to those narratives that we've been taught.
That's very interesting, and also very dangerous, that kind of isolative.
For sure.
Because you never really see in person someone that is different from you. And with that, fear could settle in. And that's, you don't, once fear settles in and that void of ignorance isn't cleared up by meeting someone different, with a different perspective than you are. I mean, you could say there is no apartheid in okay, let's pick a random Eastern European country where I'm sure up to today the population is very homogeneous. That is, in a way, it's not a conscious segregation, but they are not exposed. They are not exposed to diversity. So once they are exposed, their reaction is like, one has to take that reaction with a pinch of salt, because they're simply not exposed. But it still doesn't justify if the reaction is, unlawful.
Exactly.
A human is a human. It still doesn't justify that. So you were basically born in South Africa and lived there basically all your life. So are there any other, growing up in an apartheid kind of setting, are there any other things we wouldn't think about that you basically experience on a daily basis? Because it is very, a lot of people, when they think about it, they think it happened, 500 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, they think is really far, but it's within lifetimes.
Yeah, but also that's an interesting thing. Before I get into my life, it's I came across something recently that also how media portrays things. If I show you a picture in black and white, you think it happened so long ago, and that has a way of how people think about things, right? But the people who lived through apartheid are still alive,
Of course,
right? But when I show it to you in black and white, it triggers this thing that, oh, it happened a long time ago, let's move on,
right?
You know, but how do you move on from a generation of oppression and suppression and exclusion from opportunity, from the economy and all of these things? So, you know, I was born in 1992, and 2 years later, 1994, 27th of April, we had the first democratic elections. So I was kind of born just before, you know, democracy. Yeah. So South Africa is a young, you know, democracy. It's a very young democratic country. So we're still kind of figuring out all of these things, like coming together as a country, you know, moving into the same neighborhoods, engaging with each other, going to schools, and part of it, I think, is going to be better with time, because some you know are growing up in those spaces where they are interacting with different races and diversity from a young age, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, no, that sounds very challenging, honestly.
Yeah.
It honestly sounds like, because these things don't happen overnight, even though a paper is legislated, you know, even though on paper it is, the habits won't die that easily, the social norms won't die that easily. One has to really have this mindset of unity in diversity,
right,
and focus on that, because there
because
is a lot that is pulling this away, and you know, a lot that is discouraging this from materializing.
Yeah, we try. That's that phrase that you use, unity in diversity. If you flip the back of a South African coin, we have that in one of the sound languages, and it's ike ikacha ike, which means united in diversity. So we're trying to get there.
No, that's
and embrace that spirit of unity.
No, that's beautiful, and that's needed. That's absolutely needed, because in one part of the world we're seeing these trials and tribulations that have kind of, as they say, scorched the earth, that has made it, you know, fertile enough now to start fresh.
Right.
But then we see, like in the US, things seem to be going backwards. So personally, I feel that, I mean, as you said, we all more or less know the details. There's no point in going to details right now. But I feel that there are not a lot of people who understand how fresh this is. And when a lesson isn't taken seriously, it repeats itself.
For sure.
When a lesson isn't learned, it definitely repeats itself. And as you said, there are people who have been alive during the apartheid that are still alive right now. Have we really learned the lesson?
That's a tough one.
Right?
That's a tough one. Because you know, it's very tricky, because it's one thing to learn the lesson, and it's another thing entirely as well to go back into society, you know, because the one thing also we should think about is that with all of what has happened, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of aggression, right? So how do we get to that place of reconciling? That is a really hard thing, right? Because we've all kind of endured deep amounts of pain in certain ways. You know, I know from my grandmother, like telling me stories of how things were, you know, like having to carry your ID around everywhere you went, like you had to have a curfew, like you couldn't speak to X amount of people at a certain point of time.
Wow.
So it was very like strict, like why can I not go to the beach because there's a sign that says blacks only, whites only, right? So how do you know, jump out of that?
Right.
So I think that's a really hard thing to do.
And what happened to mixed marriages?
Oh yeah, it is getting better, but during apartheid it was illegal.
Of course.
It was illegal, so you couldn't be black, white, and and be together.
Right,
So that's
right.
why South Africa, I think, is the only country that has a race that is called colored, because those were interracial relationships,
Right.
and they had children.
Right.
But then it was a group. It was made into a group, and it was called colored. So you had white people, you had black people, you had colored people, you had Indian people. So all of
I
those
see.
groups were segregated.
So even colored had their own?
Yeah, as mixed people, they
Right.
had their own.
Right.
Exactly.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's how it was. That's how specific it was. So, for example, Trevor Noah, he tells a joke in his books and in his comedy how he was born a crime because he wasn't allowed to exist as a person. So that's how he.
That's
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when he jokes about it, but if you think about it, like a human being being born, you are a crime
Right.
from the moment you are born. Like that's a crime. You are not allowed to exist, and it kind of shows you how racism. It just doesn't work, right? Because always love prevails, like genuinely, and so colored was kind of defeating the purpose of racism superiority.
Indeed.
But they didn't want to acknowledge that, so you box it
Of
as
course,
well, right?
Of course.
Like colored.
No, that's a powerful statement right
Yeah.
there. The fact that colored, was defeating that racial superiority due to it being mixed.
Exactly.
So they label it a crime.
Yeah.
They box it out.
You box it out.
That's
crazy.
insane.
Eh?
That's insane. Because I'm mixed. My dad is
Yeah.
white. My mom is black.
Yeah.
So just thinking about it
Yeah.
is it's actually insane.
Yeah.
And what's shocking, honestly, is one still has to discuss this.
Yeah.
I think that for me is what is most disappointing.
Yeah.
One still has to
Yeah.
explain why this is wrong.
Yeah. For sure.
But how is it like? How long have you? Let me put it: the climate. I don't know how long you have tested the Norwegian or Scandinavian embrace when it comes to unity and diversity. Let's put it in that term.
Yeah.
How is it from your perspective? Because I have one or two
Yeah.
one or two things to say about that.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
from your perspective.
Yeah, it's for sure. I would say very, very different.
Right.
Because I can tell you for sure, and this is just to show you the kinds of realities that we grow up in. When I said to my family, "Hey, I'm moving to Norway," they were like, "Look at the demographics." Like, "Are you sure?
Are you
like,
sure?"
Seriously?" And I mean, it's kind of a small thing, but it especially like my grandparents, they're like you want to stay with white people?
Yeah.
But what it says is the idea of associating this with that kind of race,
Right.
which needs to be dismantled.
It does.
You know what I mean?
Because it does go both ways.
Exactly. But moving here so far, it's been great. Haven't experienced much
That's excellent.
much craziness. But having traveled a bit around, I'm told that Oslo is the most kind of divided city out of all the cities in Norway. All the other cities seem to be like integrated.
True, that's true. There are more sections per se in Oslo than anywhere else. That is true.
Yeah.
Sweden is a lot more because it's a bigger population as well.
Right.
They're like 11 million.
Yeah.
But like Stockholm is very mixed, but
Yeah.
you do have some areas as well.
Yeah.
It's true. Right now, I would like to go back to. So, growing up in South Africa for you, I'm sure. Well, you did explain with geography and archaeology how you like just get me in, but did that sway your choice of entering archaeology and the history of South Africa? Did that kind of make you lean into archaeology more?
Yeah.
And how did that impact your life as an adult man, living in South Africa, even though it was modern era South Africa?
For sure. I mean, one of the shocking things for me was, and this is one of the things that got me into archaeology, is I would sit there in lectures and hear professors talk about, South African history. But one of the things that struck me was they were mostly from foreign countries. They were mostly from England, most of my archaeology professors. And the question was, why did I not learn this history in high school? You know what I mean? And I'm only learning about it at university. And we have to understand that when you make it into university in South Africa, that's a privilege in itself. There's a lot of people who don't get a chance and opportunity to go to university because of finances or all sorts of other reasons.
And that's a lot of uninformed people.
Exactly.
If that's the only source of information.
Exactly. So, and that's, for me, that was that point where I was like, oh, okay, this is so interesting. And I thought to myself, perhaps this is how I could contribute. Because then it kind of shifted my perspective to say that, well, now I know that, people had civilization before colonization. They did amazing things. They traded, they built things. So it helped me gain that sort of confidence in a sense of, I know where kind of my people come from, right? And what they've built and what they've been able to accomplish as communities. And I can share that and I can give back to people. Because once you take away people's history, you kind of take away their sense of identity as well. So that's why part of not acknowledging, for example, going back to that example of those World Heritage Sites, part of not acknowledging that you built this is scraping off, hiding your identity, which is what happened in a lot of African countries. It's like a lot of the history was like,
hidden,
scraped off the bottom. And then you have a people who are sort of, have a lack of identity to some degree, which is, I think, is a really important thing, because the opposite is true. Because I've met people, for example, who grew up thinking, yeah, but MC, we built the roads.
I see what you're saying.
I see what you're saying. They use the opposite. We built the roads. We built technology. We discovered the gold in South Africa. So why is this happening this way? But they also don't understand what happened before. So that's why when we talk about education, it's not that education of one race. It's about everybody.
Exactly.
So that we understand that we as a collective contributed, right? Like, how do you go to a place? How do I go to your house and conquer your house without knowing anything about your house?
Right.
Like, if you think about it that way, like, how did they come to Africa?
No, it's you need both.
You
do. Now, that's a good example, actually, and that really sheds light on the fact that both sides, and it goes both ways. Both sides need that information.
Exactly.
Because at the end of the day, there's no such thing as too much truth.
Yeah.
There's no such thing.
There's no such thing.
The truth is singular, and the more people who know it, the clearer we can navigate through this.
The better.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's. I myself, I grew up in Cameroon, West Africa, 9 years. Obviously, it's nothing close to that, but you do have. Okay, there's good and bad everywhere, as they say.
Yeah.
But you do have some certain similarities, we could say, due to the colonial history and being mixed race, but it's not to that extent at all. So it's funny that during all this time, what I could say, I'm 28 now. We're both the same age, I think 92. One feels like one is in the same spot, even though, the internet has kind of made the world smaller. We see more, bad news per day than before, but we never really see the good news. So that plays a huge factor. So even though statistically speaking, you could say that, things are getting better statistically, poverty is getting eradicated more statistically, meaning they're getting less, or we are having less third world countries, and they're raising out of poverty at high percentages per year. Also, we are seeing that there is more effort. There are more efforts towards health and education. So there are wheels turning, but these wheels, if they are not double checked, if the education is the same thing, are we going just spinning our wheels in the same spot?
Yeah, and that's the key thing, because if you think about if you think about it in so many ways that a lot of sectors in the world have advanced and changed, but education hasn't. We still have in most parts of the world, we still have a 19th century, 18th century education system which teaches people to be useful, right? Because that's what they needed back then. You needed people to be useful. But now, if we look at what is needed in the world, probably the top 5 skills that are going to be needed in demand in the next couple of decades, it's things like emotional intelligence, people skills, critical thinking, problem solving, right? Those things which need people to think for themselves.
Intelligent flexibility.
Exactly. And that is what allows then people to look at things with a pinch of salt, right? Because if you talk about, for example, the media, also we have to, because it's set up in a certain way that it portrays things in a certain way.
Right.
And Denzel Washington said something amazing when he was asked about this. He said, if you read the newspaper, you are misinformed, but if you don't read it, then you are uninformed, right? So there's so much power in that. So you need that critical thinking to be able to dissect these things and make informed decisions.
And to specifically be aware of this.
Exactly.
I feel awareness, once you have that, as you said, everything is taken with a pinch of salt.
Yeah.
And that really gives you more open-mindedness.
Yeah, for sure.
Because a lot of, you can't just go into blind faith either. We were talking about this with I think that in the last podcast we spoke about even how people use the search engine in Google. A simple question, depending on how you phrase it, you could be either phrasing it to get a yes answer, phrasing it to get a no answer, and depending on how you type. For example, let's say we're discussing if apple pie is made with Scandinavian apples or Chilean apples, the original apple, whatever. And I'm saying no, it's made with Scandinavian apples.
Yeah.
The chances are I would search apple pie made with Scandinavian apples.
Yeah.
So we're leaning towards what I want to see, confirmation bias. And you would search apple pie made with Chilean apples instead of searching what is apple pie made with.
Exactly.
So we have to learn how to, in a neutral sense, explore the world in an open mind and remove that ego, and especially not attach our identity to that ego. Because the second your identity is attached to something, even though you know it's right, you're not going to let it go.
Yeah. That's so very true. And I mean, on top of that as well, I think that the other thing that's lacking is probably having safe and constructive spaces where we can talk about this. Because what I see a lot happening in society, South Africa or the US, is that we immediately go to these, and because we attach it to identity, and we say just like my people, your people,
right?
And then it's just like talking at each other, and then it's just defense, and then we lose the conversation. We lose coming to that space of having a conversation and learning about your world, so that when I say this or Black Lives Matter, you can exercise a level of empathy because you understand.
Right. Not because you associate that with a certain identity.
Not because of or
political party.
But you have, Yeah. So that's one of the things that I've seen has been lacking. I mean, even in South Africa, I think in some spaces, there are people who are doing something to change this, but in some spaces I see that we're not able to, have these conversations and really unpack what it means, because things like segregation and apartheid, you can't just jump over it like a skip rope, because what you denied people of is generations of economy, of knowledge, of all of these things. For example, when I went to university, my mother said to me, boy, you have to go to school, but I don't know this world because I didn't get a chance to study. So you're going to have to go out there and figure it out for yourself what you want to study, and I will be your biggest supporter.
Wow.
Right? So, but if you come from a family where someone has studied before, then I can take you through, there's medicine, there's this. So that's
I see your point.
Exactly.
And honestly,
that's a small
exactly. It's a powerful example.
Yeah.
The fact that, so you were basically the first generation.
Yeah.
That is powerful. And that shows you how much you can appreciate education for what it is.
Yeah.
Because one thing I saw was, at least in Cameroon, we would see there would be certain times where you would actually catch some people sneaking into school.
Yeah.
So when I came to Norway when I was 9, I was seeing people sneaking out of school.
Out of school, yeah.
And that blew my mind.
Yeah, you're like, what?
Why do you want to leave?
Yeah.
I couldn't understand why do you want to leave
Why would you
school?
want to do that?
But this is exactly the gap where what you don't have,
Yeah.
you value.
Yeah.
What you've had for generations, if not emphasized and stressed upon, you don't see the
Yeah,
value, even
that's
if
so
it's
true.
education.
Yeah, that's so true.
So the fact that, she said that, you're looking at it from a lens of gratitude and value,
Yeah, for sure.
which you should,
Yeah.
that is education. One should look at it through that lens.
Yeah, for sure.
So how far back do you have to go for the average, pick a random country, how far back is the average, like how many generations do you have to go to see when they entered university,
Yeah, exactly.
One is very,
Yeah.
it's very low.
Yeah.
But that's amazing,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
Congrats on that.
Thank you.
Congratulations on
Thank
that,
you.
for real.
Yeah, thank you so much.
It's not something to be taken lightly.
Yeah, for sure. I hope to use it.
And you're going straight to PhD. That's insane.
Yeah, so I'm writing up my thesis now, and I'm submitting it before Christmas, actually.
Really?
Yeah, so I submit the thesis for Christmas, and then it has to go through a process of evaluation, and then we'll defend it next year.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. How do you defend the thesis?
Yeah.
I've defended mine medically, but how is
Yeah,
it
yeah.
with archaeology?
So here they set up what do they call it? A committee
Right,
of like experts in the field who are going to examine my work word for word, and then once they see that it's fit for defense, then we'll set a date, and then on that date it's a public defense here in Oslo, so anybody is welcome to come.
We're going, guys.
And
We're going for support. When he defends his PhD.
For sure. And then I have to stand there and give a trial lecture on the topic that they pick, and then after that they grill me and poke holes
in it, yeah.
Yeah, and I have to answer and defend my work.
Right.
Yeah.
So that does sound heavy though. But I heard you speak multiple languages as well.
Yes. So let's actually start with my name before we go into that. So the reason I'm called MC
right?
is because my name is Mncedisi. So it's a Nguni name in multiple languages. As I said, in South Africa we have 11 official languages. So I am Xhosa, but I speak Xhosa, Zulu, and I speak Sotho and Setswana, like a mix of both of those languages. So a lot of people in South Africa are multilingual.
Right.
We go around, meet people, and then English, of
right,
course.
of course,
Yeah,
of course.
yeah.
Norwegian, not yet.
Bara
Oh,
litt.
that's the easy part. that's the easy language. It's phonetically the same, like when you write.
Still trying to learn.
No, that's an amazing leap in one generation.
Yeah.
So definitely hardworking or gifted, maybe both.
I think hard work for me. I think you have to break a sweat to get anything. I think if there's anything like talent, it's probably 5%. 95% of it is gonna have to be,
I like that.
blood, sweat, and tears. Yeah, I think so. Because if you look at part of what I'm saying is, there's a professor from the States. I think his name is Bruce Lipton. He's
Right, I know.
Yeah.
I've heard
So
of him.
he's the first 7 years is like when you're downloading programs.
Right.
But after that, it's going to be repetitiveness. In order to be good at something, you have to do it and get after it like crazy to be able to get something.
Because he talks about the first 7 years of a child's upbringing.
Exactly.
The brain is in, was it delta wave state?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's delta or theta now, but I've forgotten. But
Yeah.
anyways, the brain is in a wave state that absorbs everything around it effortlessly.
Yeah.
And no, I love Bruce Lipton. He has amazing theories and amazing proven
Yeah, for sure.
Ideologies that really bend biology and medicine.
Yeah.
And if one really learns how to and understands how to manipulate this to one's own learning curve, one can lessen it. For example, with the brain waves, how to get more into that state to learn quicker.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it's because for me, when I got into his work, it was I looked at my life and looked at a couple of things. It's like it's so sad because I looked at poverty, for example. I was like, this is probably why it's so hard to get out of poverty, because if you're born into an environment of like poverty, pain, and suffering, and that's what you absorb in the first 7 years of your life, then you kind of, it's hard to get out of that cycle, to break it. But if you're born into a good family,
right,
even if you're not the smartest person, you kind of have the demeanor to make it, even though you're not the smartest person, which, and all of these things kind of repeat themselves, which is a sad thing. I was like, when I listened to that, I was like, whoa, this is so deep, because it kind of explains why, like, poverty, goes on, the rich get richer and poor get poor,
right,
which is
because majority of the decisions we make are subconscious. Majority of it is body language, is interactions, who we speak to, how we move, and if we're absorbing most of it, through the first 7 years of life, you'll be playing that, or you'll be speaking that language, that subconscious language in your adulthood without even knowing you're doing it.
Exactly.
Either to, let's say, to steer your life into a more economically stable part, or not. It does play a massive role. It really does. That I couldn't have said it any better. That is typically why it's harder to get out of poverty.
That's very profound.
And I mean, I've met a lot of really, really smart geniuses that haven't got out of quote unquote poverty. And I've met a lot of average guys. Average guys that do way beyond their means. And if you ask them, they'll be like, I don't know, I just
worked.
I just did this and it worked. So there is something more to biology. There is absolutely something more to simple upbringing of a child. The environment plays a massive role.
For sure.
I don't know if you saw the rice test. It's actually a very popular test where you just put rice in 3 different environments and you see how they germinate and grow depending on the stress level around the environment.
I haven't seen that.
That's actually pretty interesting, where you he did this with proteins, but he did this also with rice. But the protein filaments he did this with was in an environment that is isolated, in a positive environment and in a negative environment, and they actually decayed accordingly.
Okay.
So the proteins decayed according to the environment they were in. So the positive one did decay the least.
Okay.
The negative one decayed, and the one that was isolated actually decayed the most.
Okay.
So it was like isolation was worse than negative attention. Because it's still attention.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So environment is like, that's epigenetics, really. You enter that field of, okay, we're all born with these genes, but do the genes influence outside, or does the outside influence the inside genes?
That's so true.
So more than ever, this really makes us question and really makes us have a duty to focus on our environment. What is in our textbooks?
Exactly.
What is on the posters? This is the environment again.
Exactly. Because it all goes back to that. And once we sort of get that part right and focus a huge amount on it, I think then we'll start to be on the right track.
That's great. That's good. That's amazing. So after you defend your thesis, like maybe you have not thought that far, but what are your plans? Teaching?
Yes. So So I don't know. Is this the time where I get to talk about? Did you see that on my CV about my brand? Is this the time where I talk about that?
I think so. I think so.
But yes, of course, academically, let me start there. I will finish the PhD, and we have this thing called a postdoc in academia, which is that period between after like a PhD and before you like go into university and teach, which is most like 2 years, like a temporary contract. So I will probably do that for a bit. But I also have other plans and ideas that I would want to work on academically, and one of which is the idea which got me to stay in archaeology, which is bringing it to the to people, bringing all of this knowledge to people. Because one of the things I realized about academia is that we use a lot of, like any other field, jargon when we write. It's very specific terms, right? So, and then we write in a certain level. But also, to some degree, we kind of write to ourselves, right? Because we read the journal articles, but the information doesn't get out to people in those digestible pieces, where they can, chew on it and think on it, and
because it's usually written from expert to expert.
Exactly, expert to expert in books, in journal articles, but people never get to, engage with that content, with that material, and so that's one of the things that I want to venture into, and I have a couple of ideas of how I want to play around with this.
Is it classified, like between you and me, no one else?
Yeah, this one is going to be classified.
Okay.
I was warned that I should keep certain things.
Go for it. No, I mean, like, do not talk about it.
But yeah, but it's
classified.
it's in the that's what I want to work on.
It's absolutely needed, because the people who need to hear it the most are not the experts, even though it's given expert to expert.
Exactly.
People who need to hear the most are literally, you could say, the foundational stages of education.
Yeah, for sure.
So it has to be tiny bites of knowledge, easily digestible, black and white, clean, clear.
Exactly. Because the thing I realized was that a lot of people don't get to go to university, but not only that, archaeology is often looked at as either a hobby or a very like exotic career. So I'll give you one example. I was in South Africa and we were attending like a course with multidisciplinary, so we're having people from different disciplines, and I'm meeting people there. We're introducing each other, and I meet this lady, and she's like, "What do you do?" I'm like, "I'm an archaeologist." She says, "Seriously?" I'm like, "Yes." I'm like, "Why you say that like with such, you're surprised?" She says, "Because every time I think about archaeologists, I think about old white men."
Wow.
And that I've heard from several people. It's like, "Seriously, you're an archaeologist?" I'm like, "Yes." They come in all shades, black, brown. There's women who are archaeologists now. So there are still those kinds of like stereotypes. So that's why I think that archaeology can really contribute because of those pieces, right? Because of that detective work that we do, that deep look into history that we can bring into people, and we can bring to people in different way. So that's one of, from an academic perspective, what I want to do. But of course, MC is not just an academic. I do other things as well.
Of course.
So my other passion project is a project that I'm working on is a sneaker brand, which is called R99. And this is a beautiful story of how it all started. So when I was in my first year of university, I had one pair of shoes, and they were old, almost unwearable. And I remember this once because there was a time where I had to go meet a friend, and my shoes were so bad that I had to borrow my brother's shoes. And I'm a UK 6, and he's a UK 8.
Right.
And back then, I was skinny, and so I had to show up with these long shoes.
Oh, gosh.
Which belonged to my brother. But anyway, point is that so I had my shoes which were ruined, and in my second year of university, I got a job in the archaeology department doing redrawings, which are like those paintings that you see on walls. So I was doing redrawings of those. So
to preserve them, or
to put them on archives,
okay,
because we're losing them because of like graffiti or wind abrasion and so many other factors. So we're trying to record them. and preserve them, have them on archives.
Why is it called redrawing because that's the term, or do you actually have to redraw it?
Yeah, so you have to redraw it like physically.
Is there a reason why not picture? Would picture damage it quicker because of the flash?
We have pictures as well.
Okay.
But for archive purposes and for study purposes, we do also redrawings.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that we preserve them in multiple.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Multiple formats.
Multiple formats.
Okay,
Exactly.
that makes sense.
Yeah. So that was my first job in university, and with my first paycheck, I was able to afford a pair of sneakers, which costed 99 rands. So rands is the currency of South Africa, and 99 rands is the equivalent of $6. So it tells you about the kind of shoe that I bought. And so that was like 9-10 years ago. And then fast forward 2017, I moved to Norway. 2018, I start training. I'm in the gym. I'm training, and I was like, it would be nice to train in something that kind of embodies me and my identity and who I am. And then I was looking around, playing around with like sketches and stuff, and I was like, okay, what should I call my brand? And then I was like R99. And
that's really nice.
And then thus my baby R99 was born.
That's amazing.
So that's what I'm currently working on as well.
That's you have time to basically complete your PhD and let's say build a brand.
Build a brand, yeah.
That is impressive. All under 6 languages.
Yes.
No man, that's very impressive.
Thank you.
And I think this will just push further that. What should I say? When you said by your mom.
My mom, yeah.
That you go to university. That's not my world. This is just gonna push it that much further in the sense that I don't know if you want kids, if you will have kids.
Yeah.
But the service that is going to come with it to the next generation
for sure.
is going to be great.
Yeah.
We'll talk about the environment.
Yeah.
That's an amazing environment.
For sure.
Because these things do affect.
Yeah. 100%.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When can we expect the brand?
Yeah, so I'm wearing one of my R99s now, actually.
You are?
Yeah, I'm wearing
Do you have
now.
a website or something? We pull it up?
Not yet.
So just prototype stage?
Prototype stage now. I'm setting up a website, but it's all going to be done very soon.
I like the way they look. I genuinely like the way Yo, I'm not just saying it, guys. Have you seen it?
I mean, they look amazing.
Cool.
They're
cool
very classy.
Yeah.
I think that's the word I want. It reminds me of a tuxedo, but it's a shoe.
But it's a shoe kind of, yeah.
It's a sports shoe. I like that. Yeah.
Fantastic.
No, it would be nice to see how that develops.
Yeah, it's going to be great. I'm excited. I'm
And
excited about it.
honestly, MC.
Yeah.
How long after because you said you have to defend your thesis and all, will you still be based in Norway? Are you planning on? You would.
Yeah, I'll
Okay.
still be here.
Okay, that's excellent. Because I think as soon as the brand and your thesis comes out, we'll want to have you back.
For sure, yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. It has been a pleasure. We thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
It was very, very educational. And I hope that some people out there got what I feel I have gotten out of it.
Yeah.
There is a lot that is pushed under the rug in sense of what we take for granted, as well as a lot that needs to be questioned.
Yeah.
That we don't question, like the textbooks,
Right.
like the environment,
Yeah.
and even the fact that we shouldn't take for granted that things could repeat.
Exactly. Yeah. Because we have to be careful, because we talked about this a bit. The one thing we learn from history is that we don't learn from history. So we have to get to a place where we unpack these issues and not be afraid of them, because being afraid of them does more damage. And when we're afraid of them, that's where we end up talking at each other and not to each other.
Right.
We don't reach that space of being constructive and solving the issues at hand. And this is going to be very hard work, because also what it means is that we're going to have to go through the process of learning and unlearning, because unlearning is learning, right? Because we're going to have to unlearn certain things that we were told about, for example, history, that are going to be hard for us to hear because we've grown up with those truths. So we have to get to a place where we are open-minded to the process of learning and engaging with each other.
That couldn't be better said. I'm going to leave it at that.
For sure.
Thank you again.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure to be here. Truly honored.
We have to obviously keep in touch, and good luck with your endeavors.
Thank you so much.